Welcome back to another section on how we can publish our rejected paper and how we can resubmit a paper as well. I want to talk about the idea that we need to be prepared to send our paper back after we are rejected. After you're rejected, that doesn't mean you should give up on your paper. You need to get it back in the mail, get it back through email to another journal just as fast as you can. But before you do, I think you should revise at least a little bit to make your paper look different. Why? Because the same reviewer may be chosen by the second journal that just rejected you by the first journal, and you want to show him that you've at least fixed the easy problems that he identified in his review when he rejected you before. I think you should resubmit quickly and don't do a major revision for a journal that is rejecting you. Why? Because another journal may like you just how you are. Don't do a major revision until you've been rejected 3 or 4 times, and then maybe you can see some common concern from the different reviewers and use that to do a major revision. Minor revisions, do every time. Major revisions, possibly wait until you've been rejected a couple times before you do that. Here's my little decision tree about what we do when our paper is rejected. First, we receive our rejection letter. If we give up, we have no chance to publish, so don't give up. We need to then take a careful, close look at the rejection letter and determine what kind of rejection it is. There are 2 types of rejection. There's what I call conditional rejection and outright rejection. Now, conditional rejection means you are rejected, but you can possibly try again to this same journal. I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. Outright rejection means we have no second chance with this journal, and we need to then determine whether it's a fatal flaw. That means we believe every journal will reject us for the same reasons that these reviewers rejected us. If that's true, then it's probably not good to pursue publication, and of course we have no chance to publish. However, I don't think that we should make this decision that it's a fatal flaw after only 1 rejection. After 3 or 4 rejections, possibly a fatal flaw. More likely, it's not suitable for the journal. And if you give up, then you have no chance to publish. But if you use the editor and reviewer comments from the rejecting journal and submit to another journal, maybe lower impact factor, you have a reasonable chance to publish. And on the other side, if it's a conditional rejection and you give up, then you have no chance to publish. But if you use the editor and reviewer comments and submit a good letter back to the editor explaining all of your changes that you have done, you have a better than reasonable chance of publishing in that same journal. Now, before you submit your rejected paper to a new journal, you need to eliminate any evidence that your paper was rejected before. Why? Well, if the editor of the second journal knows you were rejected by the first journal, he may ask, why was this paper rejected? Maybe I should reject too. You don't want him thinking that. So try to hide any evidence. Make it look like a fresh paper that you're submitting for the first time to this journal. How does the journal editor know you were rejected before? Well, there are several ways. First, he can look at your references. If your references are all very old, maybe from 2 or 3 years ago, he will think that you completed your paper 2 or 3 years ago and have been rejected 2 or 3 times in the last 2 or 3 years. That's bad. So always add a new reference from the current year, from 2017, for example, and then the editor thinks, fresh paper, just written, just this year, just for me. Now, if you're watching this video after 2017, obviously add it from your current year. Even from your current month is better to make it look like it's very fresh, like you just wrote it. Another thing you should be concerned about is if you're using Microsoft Word. Microsoft Word often carries a record in the file of your name and the date that the file was created, and a revision history of every time the file was revised. So when you send that file to the editor, and if he sends that file to the reviewers, that file may contain your name and the date that you revised the paper last. So the editor or the reviewer can see, this paper was created 5 years ago, and then was revised 2 years ago, and then was revised again last year. He may think, this is an old paper, twice rejected before, I will reject again. We don't want him to think that. So, before you send your paper to a new journal, go to the document property file in Microsoft Word and hide or delete that document property, or copy and paste your paper to a new file so it looks like a fresh paper before you send it out to a new journal. One other thing that you should be concerned about is the first page of your literature review. Usually in your introduction, that's the beginning of your paper, you cite previous authors who discussed similar topics to yours. Your editor usually chooses your reviewer from your references. And because he's a busy man, the references on the first page of your paper have a high chance to be chosen to be your reviewers. The editor is busy, he may not have time to read your whole paper. So page 1 very well may contain your reviewers. So one thing you might consider doing is change the authors on page 1 of your paper. If you don't, you may get the same reviewer who just rejected you from the last journal. So you might want to rewrite your introduction to put new people at the front or at the top of your page, and move those first authors a little bit later on in your paper. If the editor chooses the first 3 references, he won't choose the same first 3 references as the last reviewer or editor chose. One other thing you might do, and this may or may not be helpful for you, but sometimes I meet authors who think they know who is rejecting them. They tell me, I know who the reviewer is who's rejecting me. He always rejects me. How can I avoid having him to be my reviewer? Well, this is difficult, but one thing you might do is, as we just said, your references are usually your reviewers. So don't put that author who doesn't like you and always rejects you in the first page of your paper. Put him on the bottom of page 17, someplace dark where it's likely that he won't be found. Or, in very extreme situations, I have seen authors who don't even include an author in their first paper that they send out. After the paper is accepted, but before the paper is published, they will call the editor and add in that reference so they can still cite him, but yet he will not be their reviewer. You may or may not want to do that, but that would be a technique that you might do to minimize the chance of getting a reviewer who you think will be very negative to you when he reviews your paper. Well, for more information, I want to direct you to my website, editing.tw. We revise research papers for Taiwanese scholars. We also have a blog, editing.tw/blog, where I have other videos and articles that will be very interesting for you to read if you're trying to publish your research. I've written several books that you can buy at my website, textbooks.tw. I've also republished books by great authors from North America, from England, who deal specifically with how we can better publish research papers. So to see more detail on those books that we have published and written, please visit our site, textbooks.tw. Thank you for joining us.